Welcome, everybody, to Miami's community newspapers. One more time, we will be discussing today a controversial topic: political misinformation and law enforcement and the impact on law enforcement. To my right, we have David Magnuson, retired chief of the city of El Portal, but he's also was a major with the city of Miami Police Department for better part of 2 decades, right?
30 years.
30 years, nothing major, just 30 years.
Yeah.
And then to his side, we have law professor, ethics attorney, and former state representative, J.C. Planas. Welcome, guys.
Thank
I
you.
am Robert Asensio, and I wanted to invite you guys to talk about this issue because I know that there's been a lot discussed about political misinformation, but we're not looking at the impact that it has on law enforcement and first responders, frontline workers as we come to know them. What are your thoughts on that?
As far as the misinformation, that's the large umbrella, and underneath that you would have disinformation, which is certainly an outright lie to try to distort the truth. Going back originally to this, I can tell you, just touching upon COVID a minute and efforts that I know you were part of as well, to try to get a lot of the officers vaccinated. It's during the height of Delta. And we never believed the mandates, we as such, but what we were saying is, some good debate to try to persuade people with facts. And the information coming back to me when they would say, well, we have this doctor here, we have that doctor, and you're looking at, it's like Professor Erwin Corey, the comedian on YouTube, talking about that this is bad. And when you research it, and that's the key to everything, to research it and go back, to the primary source, you realize that the information put out was BS. It was all nonsense.
So let me pause you there, because we do know that there's documented proof that the COVID pandemic actually took more lives of law enforcement in the history of law enforcement than any other assailant. Can you guys talk about that, JC? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, you can't refute those statistics. COVID was the #1 killer of law enforcement officers in the last 2 years. And again, to David's point, nobody really likes the concept of mandates. I think the issue here is you expect people to do the responsible and sensible thing. And when you have officers that are dying and you see the fact that 95% of COVID deaths are unvaccinated, how do you argue with those statistics? Yet they do. We saw a union vote in city of Miami when the now fired chief tried to institute a mandate for those officers to be vaccinated, and the union was dead set against it. Yeah. At what point are they not just playing politics rather than really looking out for the protection of their officers?
So I agree that this whole issue has been politicized, but let's dive into political misinformation and how it's affecting law enforcement. But I wanted to go to something first. It's something that not many people are talking about, but it is going to be a factor in Dade County. There's some misinformation about it. There's some facts that just recently came out, and that's the creation of the new Dade County, Miami-Dade County Sheriff's Office post 2024. Mayor Levine Cava, our county mayor, just came out with a proposal to maintain or retain most police powers under her office. So the Dade County, Miami-Dade Police Department would become the police service agency, and then you have a sheriff's office. Can we talk about the pros and cons about that and what your guys' thoughts are on the mayor's proposal versus this idea of let's go ahead and elect a sheriff and be the sheriff of the biggest county in the state?
I mean, there was a reason why we got out of having an elected sheriff, because of corruption in the 1950s. And in fact, most counties were going towards appointed law enforcement directors. And it was the Sheriff's Association that got the Constitutional Revision Commission to put this on the ballot. Ironically, it passes everywhere except for Miami-Dade County. In Miami-Dade County, the proposition failed. So basically the rest of the state enforced on Miami-Dade County an elected sheriff. What's interesting about Daniela's proposal is it takes into account, remember, Miami-Dade County has certain home rule powers in the Florida Constitution that other counties do not have. So her ability to rein in and keep certain law enforcement divisions within the county is probably within the constitutional powers of Miami-Dade County. It'll still be challenged, but I do believe that the county has a very, very good chance of prevailing and keeping what Levine Cava's proposal is because of that constitutional protection. The issue is, does she have the votes on the commission to get it passed? Right now, the way the mayor has been in the past year and a half, she has built up an enormous amount of goodwill with the community. Her approval ratings are very good. So it is probably likely that the commission will give her this. The issue is, does this commission vote on it, or do they wait until after November when we have several new commissioners?
That's an interesting thought. David, what do you think? The pros and the cons.
Well, first of all, I agree with Mayor Levine Cava, and I think she does a phenomenal job. What you just said with the goodwill out there, she puts a good product forward, and so you take her on face value in the sense that this is the right thing. But here's where my take on it is this: that you're going to have an election. Lord knows that politics runs amok in South Florida, even within police departments.
Mm-hmm.
People fighting and clawing their way to ascend to the top at the expense of others. That's just the way it happens, unfortunately. Now you have somebody who may become emboldened to somebody else that's fronting them in a sheriff's race. May not even have to be a law enforcement professional. I mean, you can look at Sheriff Jenny in Broward County. He was not a law enforcement professional.
Yeah.
That could happen. Things work with Miami-Dade County Police Department. They do an excellent job. You tip in an apple cart now, you don't know what you're going to get. And I got to go back to this because I'm so adamant against it, is the politics that injects itself into law enforcement. This is going to get much worse. And
So let me just, because you're absolutely hitting on a perfect point here. The politics that'll be interjected into law enforcement. JC, what do you think? How would the campaign for sheriff of Dade County be if the sheriff's office will retain total police powers? What do you think that campaign would look like?
It depends. We've had times where the public has fear of crime, a lot of times irrational fear of crime. And you can see certain ads that would probably try to trigger to those people's fears. It really depends on what the public mood is. Right now, what the public seems to be more concerned about than anything else is their pocketbook. Things are more expensive. If things are more expensive for us, it's definitely more expensive for the county. If the county can't afford to do things with the budget they have, are they going to raise taxes? What happens, right now, if the police department needs resources, the county can basically just, with the drop of a hat, administratively give them those resources. If the sheriff has all the police powers and is separate from the county, you'd need basically another appropriation from the county to give those resources to the sheriff. I think that's a problem. A lot of other counties have this problem. The sheriff has to go hat in hand back to their county commission to ask for more funds. And, my fear, bigger than the sheriff almost, is our election supervisor. If we have an issue, now we're going to have an elected election supervisor. Right now, if there's an issue, the county can basically wave the magic hand and provide more funds. That wouldn't happen under the other system. That's why this is so backwards.
$20-30 million raise?
It depends. We are a big county. When you look at money for races, we used to look at TV ads. The problem is a lot of people don't watch conventional television anymore. Digital ads are cheaper than they used to be. What really works seems to be door-to-door canvassing, so you have to pay for that rather than television. So it really depends on what kind of race they want to do. The other issue here is the PBA, the Police Benevolent Association, which is the union that represents Miami-Dade County officers. They have always been a big campaign arm, and who they endorse, and they send officers out into the field to campaign. They're at early voting sites. So does the PBA rather, have the mayor in charge of most of the officers rather than the sheriff? Does the PBA want somebody who's not of their ranks to be the sheriff? And I think that's gonna weigh heavily in the race as well.
So, David, you were police chief in city of El Portal. You were the police chief at, is it Havelock, North Carolina?
North Carolina, correct.
And then you also worked on the executive staff of the city of Miami, dealing with not just local law enforcement, but also sheriffs across the state. And you are also a member of Miami-Dade Chiefs of Police Association. How does the sheriff interact with the municipalities? And is it a pro for police authority to remain under the mayor as opposed to just give it to the sheriff? Is that a pro for municipal agencies?
What's going on now? I'm a big proponent. If it's not broken, don't fix it. It works well now. Do we work? Have we worked with sheriffs? Sure, we work with BSO, the city. There's not a problem with that. The idea of keeping the control where you having law enforcement here, a law enforcement person under the mayor, and continuing on that in that route, probably is going to pay better dividends. I mean, you don't know what you don't know. I mean, like in anything else. That being said, be careful what you wish for too. Again, to your point, and maybe expound upon it a little further, it can get ugly. You're gonna have this is the hub of politics here in the state. You can't get in. This is it.
You really don't want two agencies fighting on the scene of an incident.
Well, the other problem we have is, forget about the fact that now we're electing someone, but that what's being forced upon us is a partisan election. Yeah. Crime should not be a partisan issue. Yeah. It should matter if you're a Republican or Democrat. We need to fix the issue. Tax collector, property appraiser, supervisor of elections, these should not be partisan offices.
JC, you bring up a great point, because I remember when, and you could probably attest to this because you've been involved in a lot of shootouts, a lot of fights and a lot of stuff on the street. But whenever somebody was shooting at me or there was a victim calling for support or help, they didn't care if you're a Democrat or Republican. They just wanted to help, period. So crime is not a partisan issue. But guys, I wanted to shift something, go back to the topic of misinformation, how it's affecting law enforcement. So recently, the New York Times put out an article. I sent you guys the article. It's titled U.S. Capitol Police and the Scars of January 6th. And it's a summary recap, if you will, of the January 6th insurrection, impact in the Capitol on the police officers, Capitol police officer, and the Metropolitan DC officers. About 150 officers were injured as a result of that incident. And there's been a lot of misinformation going back and forth. Can we talk about that and how the misinformation led to lack of support for those officers who were injured, who were protecting the Capitol, and the misinformation that continues to follow this incident in the law enforcement community?
I take this to heart. Okay, I've read the article. I've read numerous articles. I'm on the Miami-Dade Chiefs Violent Extremism Task Force. I was the chairperson of that. And just going back a second to the COVID thing, the COVID issue we just talked about a few minutes ago, that's a springboard to everything else. The tentacles reach out. It's the same mindset here. There was a closed-mindedness. Nobody goes back to check on the information, and it becomes it becomes the gospel, to the point in the New York Times where a lot of these people, what they went through, they had to concern themselves with people putting them down. The officers getting put down, and shame on the politicians for not standing up and bashing it. And I'm going to say, and putting it where it's supposed to be, where it should have been slammed shut, for not doing the proper investigation or dragging their feet, because Mary Trump said something, and I'll paraphrase her. She said, "What should have been an eye opener, sadly, is going to be a dress rehearsal." This will happen again. Yeah. It'll happen again because there wasn't a draconian response to what took place to our freedom in this country and trying to overturn an election, and probably starting at the highest levels. Now, that being said, when the report comes out, that's information. Now, you can call it disinformation by saying, well, that's fake news. That's fake news. Well, that's an old tag. That has grown very thin. It's worn thin, right? It's not fake news. You get a couple people on there that are doing a good report. Other people refuse to join it. Some people just said recently that, listen, that's happened back in January 21. Why are we still on it? Why are we still on it? Yeah. Why are we still on it? So it doesn't happen again. But the cops at the front line, first of all, how the Capitol Police, they were ill prepared. That being said, they saved this country. They saved this government. They saved the death of a vice president.
They protected the integrity of an election that occurred, right? What are your thoughts on this, JC, and the misinformation that's leading to the disbelief of the incident itself?
I think that, part of the reason they were ill prepared was because for a lot of people, we never thought we could see what we saw. I mean, that's the issue. And I remember that there were going to be protests or whatever, but I mean, I still remember the day vividly, watching people breaking the barriers of the Capitol. This is not something that we would ever see. I mean, not since the British invaded during the War of 1812 did we see the Capitol breached. And, you know, one of the things that, and one of the most disgusting things I've seen, Marco Rubio making light of the situation, saying, oh, well, no one thought that a man wearing bullhorns and yoga pants was going to take over the government. No, they weren't. The whole purpose, they were not trying to take over the government. They were trying to scare Congress people to leave and evacuate, so then Trump could declare martial law, saying Congress has abandoned its post. Never mind, we're going to dissolve that. That was the plan. That was Steve Bannon's plan. That's what the January 6th Commission is actually finding out, that there were people, Trump may have not known the extent of it, but people like Steve Bannon, that was the thing. They wanted,
if that's the case,
they wanted folks to invade so Congress would flee. And then congressmen started calling each other saying, don't leave, don't leave. And those Capitol police officers were able to hold down the line. Those folks that held that third door, I mean, you were asking a question.
Yeah, so Caroline Edwards is a U.S. Capitol police officer. She was 31 at the time. She's about a 5'4" female officer. By all accounts, from her peers, a hard ass, take no nonsense, take no prisoners, police officer, cop's cop. Yes, she was the first victim of the mob that encouraged onto the Capitol. She was hit over the head and knocked unconscious, almost killed, lifelong illness impacted. She was struck over the head with, I believe, bike racks. Yeah. Not just one, but several bike racks, metal bike racks. Think about that. That's horrific. Yet, a lot of officers across the country do not believe the accounts of what these 150 or so officers who were victims and injured went through. What's going on there?
There were officers
as part of
there were officers from other places as part of the mob on January 6th.
Yeah,
that's part of the problem.
Groupthink mentality too.
Yeah.
I mean, again, it goes back to this. How do you sift through the truth or the fake news? Research it. If you're too lazy to research it, then don't take it on face value. I mean, or that's what you're doing. Research it. Everything leads back to a primary source. It's easy enough to say fake news and let it go at that. It's ridiculous. You know, it's for my brothers and sisters in blue. I mean, yeah, there's an issue. There's an issue across the country. There's a, sadly to say, a closed-mindedness. And I don't mind getting flack over it. There's a closed-mindedness, and it's not leading to good things. Let me say something else. The most obscene thing that I find through all of this is how the Republicans censured Cheney, you know, and Adam for stepping up and trying to get to the bottom of it, to go to that primary source, to get away with the dis and misinformation. They get censured. But then you have other people there that are basically attending Nazi rallies and stuff, and it's like a joke.
You know, I have to say that the most horrifying call for cry that one can hear over the police radio is a call for backup to assist an officer who is down, being attacked, and just being pummeled. I, for the life of me, can't understand, and this is not partisan, for the life of me, I can't understand this disbelief of trying to get to the bottom of the truth. Our officers were injured, beaten. I mean, if an injury to one or an attack on one is an injury to all, or an injury to one is an attack on all, however the saying goes, what can we do as a law professor and an attorney on politics, and how do we rein in what's going on with this misinformation?
You know, and
we have 2 minutes, guys, by the way.
One of the big things, I remember during the Black Lives Matter protest, people kept saying, oh, cops were killed. No cops were killed during the Black Lives Matter protest. And during all these months, through all these areas, you probably had roughly the same amount of injuries, permanent injuries of officers, as you had on that one day in Washington. Yet whenever you bring up January 6th, the whataboutism is, well, what about Black Lives Matter protest? This whataboutism is part of the problem that we have. We have people who have this mindset that they want a certain type of country, and Trump sort of channeled these folks. So now they are going to do whatever is possible to have that kind of country that Trump promised them. And that's the problem we have, because they'll do it by any means necessary, whether it's overthrow the government, whether it's injure their fellow police officers or anything, because they think that it's almost the end of democracy, because democracy means the other side can win. They don't want the other side to win. And that's what's scary.
But that has to stay out of law enforcement. There has to be strict neutrality for all.
How do we stop it?
Very strong policies, first of all. You can have an opinion. Those that wander off into a right-wing extremist mentality, get rid of them.
Yeah.
I mean,
for that
get
matter,
rid of them.
An extremism on either side, right?
Either
Yes.
side. And that's the other whatism, because when you argue about it, they say, yeah, but look at this and look at that. But if you had 10 instances, 9.5 of them are right-wing. Yes, there is also there, but the vast majority, the FBI's warned us. The FBI's warned us about extremism in law enforcement back in 2006. Okay, this is an issue that's been going on. It's getting progressively worse. Perhaps a story for another day, but nonetheless,
Homegrown terrorism.
it all coagulates.
Listen, it boils down to the fact that you have, at the core of Trumpism was people that wanted to go back to like the 1950s mentality. Everybody's white. There's no immigrants. Women knew their place. Minorities knew their place. And, unfortunately, that has permeated all areas of society, including law enforcement. And it's an unrealistic view of what this country is about and where this country's headed.
God, I wish we had more time. So we're going to have to do round 2, if you guys don't mind, because this is a topic that we must discuss.
There will be a round 2. It's 2024 is coming.
So for those of you listening, those of you tuning in, I can't thank you enough. Please drop us a line. Let us know what your thoughts are. Remember, this is not a partisan issue. This is an American issue. What do we do to ensure that our safeguards of democracy are maintained? I can't thank you enough, JC Planas. I can't thank you enough, Chief David Magnuson. I look forward to having you guys again. We need to make sure we have a couple more conversations. Maybe we can expand the pool of who we can talk to about this, but I want you guys to really help us break through this information. Again, to the Millers, Michael Grant Miller, Community News, we can't thank you enough. We look forward to speaking with you on the next one. This is Robert